sending the immigrants to South Sudan, right, which is a country in a civil war. They were doing that a few weeks ago. Dropping them off in Africa with, thatched huts and a civil war going on. And they don't speak Mexican now. Steve Vetrano here. Glad to see you back. Trying to get some more education, more knowledge. I'm a little ahead on this game right now with the census that has come up. It's become a hot topic, and I think in the next few weeks it'll be a bigger hot topic. So you may not be aware yet of where we're going. We all know the census is conducted every 10 years, right? On a year ending in 0, United States. Been that way every 10 years since 1790, no exception. President Trump wants a census conducted this year, he just announced. Sounds strange. So what's the rules on the census? Where did it come from? Who owns it? Census was included in Article 1 of the Constitution of the United States. It was ratified back in 1789. Article 1, so it's kind of important up there because the lawmakers that were framing the Constitution wanted to keep track of who was in the United States, where they were, so they knew which way we're developing. They could plan economics, politics, and things like that. Most European countries used to do a census to know who lived where, to make sure that every house was recorded to go pay taxes when the tax man was sent around. It's literally what they did, but it was done totally different here in the United States because the framers wanted to just know who was where. The United States Congress was directed to run the census in that Article 1 of the Constitution. So Congress got the power and the requirement to conduct a census every 10 years. So we just covered that, came out of the Constitution. In 1954, they passed Title 13 of the United States Code that delegated that power and responsibility for the census to the Secretary of Commerce, which is on the President's cabinet, which is going to matter in a few minutes, and I'll tell you why. I never knew that it was the Commerce Department that ran it, but they do it. Here's the point of the census. You figure out who lives where in each state. There's 435 delegates in the Congress, and say Congress people, men and women, also delegates. That's the same 435 that does the Electoral College after an election. So you get the matching numbers. So when you win a state and say California is worth 52 delegates, that goes to this person. They've got a big jump because that's more than 10% of the entire United States' vote goes to those 52 delegates. Okay, but that's also the same number they have in Congress. So it's easy to remember that way. California is obviously the biggest with 52. Texas is, I think, second biggest with 38. Florida follows with 28. But you get to states like Iowa with 4 people. So it matters. It matters a lot, but that's where the states with the big population have the big power. So when the census is conducted and the population change is identified, the states that get more or fewer representatives have to redraw their maps so that they can decide where the congressional districts are. For instance, the last census in 2020, California lost one of its delegates, one of its seats. It had 53, now it had to go to 52. So you have to take that little spot that's not represented and blend it in with the other surrounding ones so that 52 people could cover the ground that 53 used to do. Right? Makes sense? Texas gained 2 seats, so what used to be divided 36 ways had to be divided 38 ways. It's good, gives them bigger vote and presence in Congress in Washington, but you have to just draw these maps a little. So that's where the map requires, after the census, that each state redistrict and balance its representatives. So the year's 2025, right? I think we all agree on that. That's one thing politics we agree on right now is today's still 2025. We just talked about the census is conducted every 10 years, only in the years that end in 0. Why does President Trump want to do a census now? And can he? And that's a blurry answer. So he wants to now to redraw these maps so that he can have more Republican favorable districts. Each state will draw them for him. So it protects the majority that you have in the House and the Senate. Okay, that's the whole goal here. It is permissible, back to the Constitution, to have a census in the mid-decade, specifically, I love this, specifically in the years ending in 5s. 2005, 2015, 2025, only those. But the purpose, this is again outlined in the Constitution. It says the purpose of that is just to figure out if the population is moved without waiting a full 10 years to redistribute federal funds. So if you have federal school program lunch assistance, right? Your state has this much percent of the population in the U.S. You're getting this percent of the lunch program. Your state gets a little bit bigger, you get a little bigger percentage. So that's fair. That's reasonable. It's never been done. We got 235 years. It's never been done, but always could be done. So now knowing that little tiny rule, we got to thank President Trump right now. He's helping us all learn the little itty bitty nitty gritty of the laws and regulations because he challenges everything. So appreciate his support on that. But so he wants to call this to redraw congressional districts, which is not permissible. Okay. Last month, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's one of the ultra-right people, she's proud to be, super Donald Trumper, complete Donald Trumper. She introduced a bill in Congress to have a mid-decade sentence conducted now with the goal of, one, redrawing these districts, even though that's not allowed or legal, and two, to take a census that does not include any non-legal citizen. So if you're in places or areas where there are voters that won't prove their ID, don't have an ID, they may or may not be documented properly or on a visa, but they're scared as hell right now because of what ICE is doing to even show up and challenge it. You get a chance to vote or take a census, they're not going to show up because you may be picked up and deported, and tomorrow you're suddenly living in a Honduran prison or in Africa somewhere, right? So it's honestly a scare tactic to scare people away, especially minorities and vulnerable populations, to take a census that only shows legal residents and use that to illegally redraw lines for 2026. And she specifically said what needs to be done now to redraw these lines for 2026. So Donald Trump loved the proposal. He made a statement last week. He says, great idea, it's good, I got my people on it. We're going to get this done. It has never been done, but he had signed his cabinet to figure it out. They do know that Congress has a responsibility they delegated to the Secretary of Commerce, who's a Trump appointee. So he's going to do what Donald Trump wants him to do. So if he says he wants a census, I think they'll come up with the census. But there's a couple problems with this idea. It is written codified law in the Constitution that redistricting cannot be done outside of the 10-year census. You can't do a mid-year one and try to do it, or mid-decade one and try to change it. That's outlawed. Okay. Also, part of Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill was to specifically only count legal residents. Well, the 14th Amendment says the census must include any resident in a state. So the 14th Amendment to the Constitution requires that any person in a state be counted for the census. It does not say they have to be a U.S. citizen or permanently employed or own property, nothing. It says any person in a state will be counted. Now, of course, the country was a little different. The demographics were different back then. Didn't have such an immigration issue. But the law is the law. The Constitution's a constitution. If you want to go change an amendment, there's a process. Go change an amendment. But you don't get to circumvent it and say, we're going to ignore the Constitution. We're going to ignore the amendments. We're going to ignore congressional mandates. We're going to ignore Title 13. All of this wrapped up in one thing. So you see where I'm going. One additional stipulation. 70 years ago, when Congress delegated the responsibility for the census to be conducted, it required the Secretary of Commerce to submit the proposed questions 3 years in advance, because some people didn't like questions that say, what is your highest education? Or how many extended family members live with you? Whatever. People take offense at different things. So for 70 years or 7 prior censuses, the Secretary of Commerce has to ask for these questions to be acceptable, because the ultimate responsibility still lies with Congress. So you submit those 3 years in advance. Now, how are we going to come up with this bill proposal last month and submit those questions, do all that, get it approved to conduct a census early enough now to have people in place in 15 months, right? We're redrawing these districts. So you're violating the laws, the equal protection laws, you're violating the census laws, and now you're trying to do it with skipping the rules that require questions in advance. So we're just skipping everything. Literally, this proposal skips everything. So this is pretty much a dead deal, right? I've shown you that at every level, it's prohibited from being done. But no, it's not. And it's not. And here's why. Again, start the lowest level. The Secretary of Commerce, who's appointed by the president, he can say, I'm starting it. I sent an email to Congress, gave them a half hour to review the questions, whatever, but we can't wait for them. The president directed him starting it because he can start it. He can do it. Then it gets to Congress. They have to say, wait, do we want to do this or not? Well, this is the fox guarding the hen house. Congress is controlled by Republicans who are controlled by President Trump. Trump wants to keep his power by keeping control of Congress, and those congressmen and women want to keep their seats by doing whatever Trump wants them to do so that they can, say, rig the election, change the potential outcome. So that's what they're doing. They're going to change the rules. So if Congress wants to take back its delegation of its power, it can. If Congress wants to change some laws, it can. What they could do is allow this thing to go. They can't change the Constitution, by the way. Congress cannot. That takes a 75% vote from all the states in the Union. Okay, and it takes years to do. So they can't do that. They can't change the rules and laws. All they could do is skip them, ignore them, cheat them, bury them, and go on with what they want. So what happens if Congress and the president, two of our three branches, are doing something that others say isn't right, isn't allowed? It goes to third branch of government at the top, the Supreme Court, which of course now is dominated by Republican advocates that have been supporting Donald Trump in about 90% of the cases going before it, all different challenges to his DOGE cuts, his support for higher education, blocking immigrants from coming in, or students losing their visas, all this stuff. So it's not a crazy stretch to say if the president wants to do it, Congress needs to do it to protect their own asses, and Supreme Court owes their favors to him. They all win. They're all more powerful if it stays like this. You think they won't make it happen? I think it could very well happen. That's why I want to get out of this up front, or get out in front of this, because it's coming up. It may not be front page news yet, but it will be. I want you to be informed so that you know it and you can discuss it when other people walking down the hall or whatever at the game with you talking about what's this big deal about it. He's a president, he could have a census. No, he can't have a census whatever he wants. No, he can't change these rules. No, they can't do it to cut out minority voters or anybody else who's here. So now you've got some facts. Thank you. In case you're wondering why I do this or why I bring these things up, not to hear myself talk, so I do that while I'm in my own sleep anyway enough. To me, the Constitution and the rules of law we have followed for 235 years is far more important than who controls Congress this session or the next session. Right now, it seems important. Sure, it's important. There are reasons it matters. But 235 years of our constitutional law can't be dismissed so that the president or Congress or whoever else can protect themselves. Okay? As an Army officer, I took an oath swearing to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I've administered that oath to many, many, many other young soldiers over 35 years in the Army, and I've always stuck to it. My friends have stuck to it. Those other soldiers, and say females, males, Marines, whatever you want to talk about, they all take it and believe it, and 99.9% of the time they follow it. That's what we do. In case you don't know, the president, when he's inaugurated, raised his hand and took almost identical oaths. Little parts are different. Congress people raised their hand and took those same oaths. Supreme Court raised their hand, took the same oath. I haven't forgotten it. I've never abandoned it. That's part of me, and that's my medal, and that's how I'm going to be until the day I'm dead. Our elected officials need to recall that they've taken those oaths, some in the past 6 months ago, some 2.5 years ago, some longer than that. Remember your oath to the United States. Keep your oath and do the right thing, even if it's not your favor. That's what America needs. Is that pretty good? That worth including?